House of the Dragon is back and off to a pretty solid start, I think. There's something big in episode 1 that a lot of people have complained about, and we're going to dig into that and why I think it's much better than people suggest. However, first, we've got a much better title sequence. Season 1's came with a strong feeling of might, but this is warmer, it's more personal and presents a stronger sense of history unfolding. Plus, it's just more visually interesting to look at the images. I found Season 1's a little bit dull. We kick off with Cregan Stark, and he provides a little exposition about a tradition Torrhen Stark began of sending a tenth of his household to join the Night's Watch. I can't say I find the acting in this scene entirely convincing, but duty is the point being made. Our opening words for this season are
duty is sacrifice.
And if that's not important in episode 1, I feel like it's sure as hell going to be important soon this season. Plus, it is important in episode 1 in its own right. This episode is dominated by grief and loss, particularly from two mothers. Daemon remarks that
the mother grieves as the queen shirks her duties.
Could Lucerys Velarion's death be considered a sacrifice in the name of duty? Probably not, but season 1 was all about how chaotic and difficult to control power can be, especially via the symbol of unwieldy dragons. Season 2 sounds like it's opening up space for the consequences of that. The sacrifices made in a bid for power, sometimes unintended sacrifices. Ones where you had no idea what the cost would be, or your simple failings or miscalculations led to consequences that others suffer the death for. I find that idea fascinating, not just the sacrifices you choose to make, but the ones that happen without your conscious awareness. I should specify I haven't read the book. Despite being a massive fan of the A Song of Ice and Fire books, everybody who read Fire and Blood advised me it's better to watch the show without knowing what happens. So I've avoided reading them, I've avoided all spoilers, I have absolutely no idea of the future of this story, beyond some small bits I can infer. The mother grieves as the queen shirks her duties. Then Rhaenyra comes back after finding evidence for her son's death. It is her duty to lead her people in this war, one that maybe involves revenge against Aemond, but that's a tricky and perhaps long-term aim. Instead, the only thing she says the entire episode, the only instruction she gives is,
I want Aemond Targaryen.
Incredibly vague instructions that lead to Daemon carrying out an incredibly flimsy assassination plan that goes incredibly wrong, and quite possibly has incredibly bad consequences. Again, I don't know what the consequences are, but to discuss my thoughts about this, we do have to spoil the ending for this episode. This is your warning. Is everyone on board for that? Yep. Daemon's assassins, if we can call them that, kill Jaehaerys. Aegon's only son and heir is now dead. It puts Aegon in a position where choosing an heir either means choosing his daughter or choosing a somewhat chaotic and unpredictable brother. How very fitting is that when we remember Viserys' choice in season 1? I love the parallel there. I love the faint sense it could be setting up a level of hypocrisy, because there is also a very similar parallel in Alicent having sex with Criston Cole, despite both of them once criticising Rhaenyra for putting her sexual desire ahead of duty, which I don't think is an entirely fair way to frame it, but this is Westeros, and this episode does a great job of conveying, even now, how very similar these two women often are, especially when it cuts between the two of them during Lucerys' funeral. I think that's a great touch, but yes, we all know if there's one sacrifice made in this episode, it's the one Helaena is forced to make. To sacrifice her son Jaehaerys. My god. I've since been told that these two makeshift assassins are known as Blood and Cheese in the book. They sneak into the Red Keep to murder Aemond, only they don't quite know the way, they get lost, there's some great tension over whether or not the maid is going to raise the alarm here, do they need to panic and act quick? Cheese stumbles upon Helaena and holds a knife to her throat. She has two children, a son and a daughter named Jaehaerys and Jaehaera. If they can't find Aemond, then it's implied Daemon suggested a son for a son. And top marks for incorporating Jaehaerys into the earlier small council scene, by the way. I think that's a great organic addition to tell us a lot about Aegon and to set up Jaehaerys so that we do care more when it comes to the end of the episode. Helena is supposed to point out the son, which she does. Blood reckons that means they should kill the other one because she wouldn't give up the heir so easily. She's probably lying, but Cheese studies her face and decides she's not lying. She has pointed out Jaehaerys, so they decapitate him off screen, but the sound is still awful. Whilst Helena is grabbing her daughter and fleeing, running into Alicent's chambers while she's having sex with Kristen. And then the episode ends with Helena shrinking away into a corner and saying,
"They killed the boy."
Before we end on Alicent's face, perhaps paralleling Rhaenyra's face at the end of the last season. Yes, a lot of people didn't like this scene. I haven't read the books, so bear with me when it initially just sounds uninformed for me to say, I think they're wrong, this scene works. But firstly, let's look at some of the criticisms. A lot of people wanted a Red Wedding level brutal event right here. I think everyone can accept and hopefully be relieved that we don't see the decapitation of a child on screen, but you could still get more weight to this scene. Yes, the Red Wedding from Game of Thrones is a much bigger gut punch, but that's mainly because of the context. We've been emotionally invested in Robb and Catelyn, and even Talisa as characters for a long time. We have so many hopes for Robb. We feel as though he's close to possibly getting somewhere, maybe turning the corner, whilst also dreading the weight of his previous mistakes, hoping they don't come back to haunt him, and then bang! The Red Wedding right near the end of the season. That same weight just isn't possible with characters we don't know half as well when it's happening in the first episode of the season. And you could argue, well, don't start the season with this event then, plonk it at the end of last season, but we have to see the rest of season 2 before we can fairly criticise the structure, I think. So yeah, that's argument 1. Argument 2 is that in the book they also have another child, a 2-year-old boy named Maelor. Rather than demanding Helena to point out which one is the son, because there are clearly 2 sons, Blood and Cheese instead torture Helena by asking her to choose which one of the sons dies. So she chooses, and then they deliberately kill the other one whilst telling the survivor to remember that his mother chose him to die, to live with that awareness. It's sickeningly cruel, and that would have more weight. Yes, I think that's a fair point. But this is still effectively Helena making a choice between 2 children. She could easily have pointed to either of them and that one would have been killed. Or in principle, depending on how well Cheese can study her face. The fact it's a choice between 2 fraternal twins, a son and a daughter with very similar names, when this is a show that's already been exploring the position of women in Westeros. Plus, it does put Aegon's line of succession in a similar position to Viserys's. I think there is a lot of sense there to just simplifying it. It does take on a slightly different meaning to the books, but it's still powerful. Introducing Maelor would also have taken a lot more explanation and set up this episode, possibly setting up a lot more about Blood and Cheese so that we buy why they're being so horrifically cruel. And still, Jaehaerys could now grow up knowing her mother chose her to live, despite not being the heir. Or even if she doesn't know that, or she doesn't see Helena's actions as a choice, which I don't think they necessarily are, it would still feel a hell of a survivor's guilt. I got to live instead of my brother simply because I am a girl. That's massive. And Helena, I imagine, is going to be absolutely rocked by all of this. It is different to the books, but depending on where the rest of the season is going, I think this could make for tighter, clearer character arcs. And thirdly, a lot of people don't seem to like Helena's reaction. She points out Jaehaerys pretty quickly, she then flees without so much as a scream, and I personally really like that. I think it's nice to see shock depicted in television. I think the fact Helena doesn't scream or beg or try to fight will possibly compound her guilt even more after this, which is awful and unfair, but you can see how she might feel that way. In a moment, perhaps she fears that screaming would lead to them killing both of the children in a hurry, perhaps killing her as well to shut her up before then killing both, now not knowing which one is the boy. Most likely it's not even rational, it's just an autonomic response. Trauma. I think it's great. It's not as overt as if she was screaming, but it's just as powerful, if not more, because I think had she screamed, people would come running, and then there's the panic at the killers attempting to get away. That would take some of the focus. I think this scene needs the silence. If you watch this scene and you argue Helena doesn't care enough, I think you've probably misunderstood her emotions. And then when she walks in on Alicent and Kristen having sex, I do wonder why their door wasn't locked, but you realise had Kristen stuck to his duty, he may have been outside the room, maybe have noticed what was happening and possibly even been able to prevent it. There's that pesky word duty again. It's a little bit on the nose that they're having sex during this moment, but it does make sense. We're seeing Alicent all of this episode reluctant about war, be that from morality or pragmatism or empathy towards Rhaenyra. You could even argue moral superiority to try and feel like the good, righteous side, despite actually indulging in many of her critiques of Rhaenyra. Alicent, I think, is in many ways caught between her duty and her humanity. I find it fascinating to see how often she is juggling so many different parts, and right at the end of this episode I think is when some of that comes undone. She lit a candle for Lucerys Velaryon, she sent words of apology. What will she do now that Jaehaerys is dead? I don't know exactly, but we can see an arc for her in this episode, and I'm looking forward to finding out in episode 2. I think this is a great episode. I think it's a great final scene, and if you can accept it is different to the books, and it has different strengths and different weaknesses to that version, I think you can recognise it does still work. It's still good. If it wasn't for the slightly clunky and unconvincing first scene at the wall, I'd possibly give this episode an 8 or even a 9 out of 10. But as it is, I think it's sitting maybe on a solid 7. Those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think, especially if you disagree with my thoughts on the final scene. Like the video though, maybe even support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee, but otherwise, hopefully listen to this.
The Smiths are all proud to support your grace against Rhaenyra. But, to put it simply, we are struggling.
World.
If we could but have...
51% off a subscription to World Anvil.
It would bring great relief.
World Anvil. Yep, they sponsored this video, they're still here, hopefully they'll stay here. World Anvil is an online tool for building worlds, creating characters, designing and managing campaigns for a whole slew of games. Sleuth isn't the right word, I don't know why I said that. Look, you can do all that, you can plan and write stories, you can do all sorts of different stuff for creative projects. I use it for the world building of my novel because my old system of massive Word documents became far too chaotic. Not only does the ability to create timelines with hyperlinks branching off to specific characters or articles or a billion other things, not only does that make it so much easier to quickly find the information I need, it also makes it so much easier to plan things out and kind of keep going. Sometimes a blank Word document for world building is very daunting, so having all sorts of tools to help with visualization, to help you figure out what needs planning next, to keep your brain fizzing and unimpeded, because all of the tools are very straightforward and easy to use. That's really important to me. It's like the sharper an artist's pencils, the freer they are to focus on the art. World Anvil is a very sharp pencil. You can create mind maps, you can rearrange elements of your story, do all sorts of campaign related things for that sleuth of games I mentioned. Yes, link in the description and as a pinned comment should you desire a 51% discount on all their subscriptions, or if you're not yet sure, then try out the free version for as long as you like. That's what I did at first, and now look where I am, shouting their name at you through a screen. World Anvil! And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Grace, Kellyanne Davidson, Luke Orr, Michael Gallagher, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.